Bueno, estamos, ¿no? Qué maravilla. Bueno, vamos a probar si funciona bien la interpretación. ¿Sí? ¿Vamos bien? Bueno, buenas noches a todas, a todos. Muchas gracias por estar acá en este evento organizado de emergencia, casi. Recién ayer a la mañana tuvimos la confirmación que íbamos a contar con el honor de tener la presencia de Raj Patel acá en Buenos Aires para poder disfrutarlo, para poder conversar con él, y pudimos organizar esto muy rápido, así con las redes que habitamos, para poder hacerlo posible. Así que en primer lugar, desde el Museo del Hambre quisiera agradecer a Pato Lizarraga. No sé si Pato, si querés decir alguna palabrita, ¿no? Bueno, Pato Lizarraga de la Fundación Rosa Luxemburgo, que sabía que existía la posibilidad que podía llegar a venir Raj Patel en algún momento, a pesar de que no teníamos la confirmación, y que inmediatamente se puso a disposición para garantizar justamente esta interpretación simultánea que hoy estamos teniendo. Así que también, por intermedio de Pato, agradecerle a las intérpretes que de manera tan rápida aceptaron el convite de estar acá y traer los dispositivos para que logremos esto de la justicia lingüística, ¿no? Que cada uno pueda hablar en la lengua que le resulta más cómoda y podamos entendernos adecuadamente. Del mismo modo, bueno, como vieron ahí, es un evento coorganizado por la Cátedra Libre de Soberanía Alimentaria, cuya coordinadora honoraria es Miriam Gorban, acá presente. Yo le conté ya algunas cosas a Raj hoy. Miriam tiene 93 años, es nuestra matriarca de la soberanía alimentaria, y ella empezó a militar en la soberanía alimentaria ya jubilada como nutricionista en la Cumbre Mundial de la Alimentación, en realidad la Contracumbre Mundial de la Alimentación de 1996. Y desde ahí hasta ahora no paró nunca, ¿no? ¿Vos estuviste en la Cumbre del 96 en Roma? Era muy chico. No estaba, ¿no? Bueno, y está también la coordinadora actual de la Cátedra Libre, que es Andrea Graciano, que te presentamos antes, y bueno, parte del equipo de la cátedra. Y también, yo no sé si vino ya Sole Bogliano, me parece que todavía no, porque también coorganizamos este evento desde el grupo ETC, seguramente va a venir en un ratito más. Pero bueno, así de emergencia, entre la Caliza Nutrición, la Fundación Rosa Luxemburgo, el grupo ETC y el Museo del Hambre, honor de que estés acá. Bueno, yo no quiero detenerme a contar cosas del museo, porque ustedes ya las conocen en general quienes están acá, así que vamos a ir a lo que hoy vamos a disfrutar, que es poder tener un diálogo, ¿no?, con Raj Patel. Él nos va a hacer como una primera presentación disparadora, pero simplemente disparadora para alimentar la discusión colectiva, y luego vamos a tener la fortuna de poder conversar con él, así que el micrófono va a estar abierto para que le pregunten lo que quieran y más, y por supuesto intervenciones de Miriam, ¿sí? Bueno, yo simplemente cortito contar que en el año 2010, hace 15 años, nos conocimos con Raj Patel en un seminario organizado en Austin, donde Raj es profesor. Y desde ahí conservamos la relación, tantos años, 15 años, pero nunca más nos habíamos vuelto a ver. Sí había visto a Irina Figueroa, compañera de la cátedra en Barcelona, pero no nos habíamos vuelto a ver hasta ahora. Y bueno, creo que no requieren mayor presentación, ustedes lo conocen, pero bueno, es un cineasta reconocido, es el autor de un libro que todas y todos hemos leído, Obesos y Famélicos. Hoy estuvo en la Escuela de Nutrición, y justo estaban en un momento las estudiantes en el laboratorio, y cuando dijeron, justo está Raj Patel acá, decían, pero pará, el Raj Patel que leemos, sí, aquí estaba corporizado, ¿no? Material obligatorio de socioantropología, acá está Gloria San Martino, ¿no? Material obligatorio de la materia socioantropología de nutrición del agua. Así que bueno, sin más, ya le conté a Raj de qué se trata el museo, así que ahorro eso. Muy bienvenido, un honor tremendo que estés acá compartiendo con nosotros. Te queremos y te admiramos mucho, y bueno, la palabra es toda tuya.
Lo siento que puedo hablar español como se hace falta, entonces en inglés. But thank you so much for coming. I am so honored to be here and so honored to have met some of the chairs of food sovereignty, some of the free chairs of food sovereignty, to be in this wonderful place. And I don't know what is of most interest to you right now that I can share, but maybe I can bring solidarity from the United States, where I live. You are suffering through Milei, and we are suffering through Trump, and the politics are interestingly. I think this is an interesting moment for the food movement, and we've seen this before. A moment where progressive and radical politics looked very superficially similar to far-right politics. Some of you will remember in 1999 that we were fighting the World Trade Organization. And we were fighting the World Trade Organization because they were destroying the future for peasants and for workers and putting power in the hands of corporations. And I was one of the organizers in 1999, and a group of fascists came to us and said, well, can we join you? Because we don't like the World Trade Organization either. We think that these globalists are destroying our country and they're bringing people in and we don't like it, and you don't like the World Trade Organization, so let's join hands. And obviously, we told them to go away. Our politics and their politics are radically different, except for this one thing, where we both don't like the World Trade Organization. We both don't like liberals. And now, in this moment of the far right, we're also seeing the rise of a far-right food politics that looks superficially like the kind of thing that we've been fighting for. So Marcos and I were, and thank you Marcos for just bringing us all together like this, for such an exciting moment. We were talking about Make America Healthy Again. This is a report that has come out in the United States, written by the office of Robert Kennedy. And it says some interesting things. It talks about how pesticides are polluting humans. It talks about how additives in our food system are poisoning our children. It talks about the power of pharmaceutical corporations. And all of a sudden, this seems something like what we have been trying to point out for a very long time. So I have to explain why I think this is very dangerous. And the reason I think it's dangerous is because this report is coming from a place of bodily purity. It's about making sure that your blood is uncontaminated by these strange chemicals. Now, I don't want my blood contaminated by chemicals, but it's not because I like purity. In fact, I like mess. I like dirt. I like the indescribable messiness and beauty of the soil. But fascists prefer purity. And if you look very carefully at the manifesto of Make America Healthy Again, or in India, you have the rise of a far-right Hindu purity in the food system, where you're not allowed to eat cows, and Muslims and Christians and low-caste Hindus are all guilty of being associated with killing cows. This is a fascist diet. And you can see this diet in a lot of different countries coming up, always with this sign of bodily purity. Does that make sense? I mean, I want to make sure that it's clear that everywhere where there is a fascist government, there are fascists telling you what to eat and what not to eat. In Italy, you have a food sovereignty law that is about the purity of Italian food. In France, you have a food sovereignty law that is about policing the supply chain, so that that French consumers will be able to get their pure, clean food from wherever it is in the world they want, but always with the sign of purity. So I think what I'm interested in is the workers. I'm interested in the work of the food system. That's why I'm here in Argentina, is to understand not just the work of growing in the food system, but the other kind of work that is invisible and that is at the heart of the food system. And this is the work of reproductive labor. So around the world there is a crisis of reproductive labor, of the work of care, of the work of stewarding seeds, of the work of looking after the soil, of looking after communities. And this is usually women's work, but not always. And because we live in a moment of polycrisis, of climate change and government violence and assassination of our comrades, the work of recovering from a flood, or the work of recovering from when your comrades are killed, that work is invisible, it is hidden, and it is central to a lot of the work that movements around the world are doing. So recently, I was working with the MST in Brazil, with a movement of shack dwellers in South Africa, and some indigenous women in the Philippines. And all of these movements are movements that want food sovereignty, but they get it not by just growing food, but by reorganizing work in the home and the community so that the community can survive. And so central to the idea of food sovereignty is not just an individual sense that food sovereignty is about an end to violence against women. And food sovereignty is about an end to violence against women. But I think it's time we move forward from that individual idea of what food sovereignty is to understanding that food sovereignty is about the transformation of social reproduction, of the way that we care for one another collectively. Because it is only through caring for each other differently that we get new forms of eating, new forms of desire for food, new ways of seeing one another. And that's the reason I'm in Argentina, is to visit an experience called La Dorotea, which is part of the Galaxias vision, which is about re-educating desire and looking after communities and individuals who have some very difficult problems with drug addiction. And the vision there is to see how agroecological farming and food sovereignty are always very tightly bound with care. And so it's an honor to be in a country that is already leading the charge when it comes to food sovereignty. And I'm here to learn from you, so maybe I'm going to be quiet and we can have a conversation. So thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias y sobre todo traer a esta mesa un tema del cual somos militantes férreos desde el vamos. En 1996 yo estuve en la cumbre de Roma, donde la vía campesina trajo esta concepción, una concepción nueva que supera la seguridad alimentaria. Es decir, un concepto más político que práctico, por supuesto. Y hablar de soberanía alimentaria en un país que produce alimentos tiene muchos significados. Y muchos significados sobre todo en nuestro país, que el papel que están jugando las grandes empresas extranjeras y multipropósitos, diría, que se están apropiando de nuestra riqueza y de nuestras posibilidades de producir y alimentarnos adecuadamente. El uso de los agrotóxicos es una constante en el modo de producción, es hegemónico en nuestro país y es una lucha en la que estamos embarcados de hace casi 30 años, que estamos diciendo paren de fumigar, paren de usar tóxicos, se están envenenando, se están, digamos, rifando el futuro de nuestra patria, el futuro de nuestro país, el futuro de la humanidad. Y si esa es nuestra lucha permanente, y en eso nos hemos identificado contigo a lo largo de todos estos años, por supuesto, donde hemos levantado la misma bandera.
Maybe we can have a conversation. Maybe while you think about the questions you would like to ask us, I want to pick up on one word which I think is the central one we should be talking about, which is the idea of hegemony. And Antonio Gramsci never used the word counter-hegemony, but we need to understand what it means. And when Gramsci was talking about counter-hegemony, he was saying that counter-hegemony is a series of experiments. It's experiments in law, an experiment in the economy, an experiment in education, and cultural experiments. But these experiments are super important to understand, because if we are serious about what these experiments mean, then we have to understand that it's about building power between workers in rural areas and in urban areas. It is about finding those members of the middle class who will also be class traitors, who will commit class suicide to be with the working class. And it is also about finding new media and new ways to tell the stories so that people can see themselves narrated not by whatever that news channel, America TV, or Instagram. But instead, we need to have our own media, our own ways of telling stories, because otherwise we have no way of interpreting the world, and therefore we cannot change it. So maybe I'll leave with this idea of asking you, what does a good counter-hegemony look like in the era of Milei?
Agarra valiente donde está.
Voy yo.
Bien.
I think trying to put those two things together that you were talking about. One is that you see the far right and the far left, or the sovereignty movements for food, both fighting against the same thing, and that's industrial agriculture, right? And same thing, industrial agriculture, consuming most of the grains, giving it all to cattle being exported. And I think if you want to do a counter-hegemony to all of these, in Brazil, in Argentina, where I'm from, in Ireland, which is also cattle producing and exporting from country. I mean, we export like 85% of the plastic. It uses all the land, then and it poisons all the rivers. Then you got to look at food for the country first, and the counter-hegemony is anti-export.
I love that idea. But, I mean, look at the way that the histories of colonialism have shaped colonies like Ireland, like Argentina. The entire political economy of rural areas is about colonialism and export. And if that's the case, then what is the vision that we are selling? The vision that we are recruiting people to join us to understand that rural areas and our food systems can look radically different. And I think you're right, that there is a way of talking about nation that is a left nationalism. But it's complicated. I have two examples of left nationalism that I like. One is from Italy in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Have you heard of the Mondine? Okay, so Italy is, and has been for many centuries, the biggest producer of rice in Europe. And to harvest rice, you need to be in the fields, and the water is up to here, and you have to do weeding in the rice season. So Mondine were migrant workers, always, usually Italian from other parts of the country. And they would come to this, the Po Valley, where the rice was. And these, usually women, migrants, would harvest for 40 days. And they became very political. They invented the song Bella Ciao. But it comes from peasant women in Italy. And I'm not going to sing the song, but there's a very interesting... But so you know that it's peasant women talking about moving from harvesting individually to harvesting collectively. Now these women were from all over Italy, just after the Risorgimento, right? Just after Italy became a country. And their vision of what Italy was a cosmopolitan idea of nationalism. It wasn't a pure idea of Italy. It was a messy idea of Italy. Like, you know, you're from Sicily, and you're from Lombardy, and you're from Venice, and we're all harvesting together. And we can sort of understand each other, and we're part of the same country. It's a messy nationalism. Exactly, but this matters because these women were the ones who fought the fascists. And they fought the fascists against the fascist demand that women stay in the home and make babies and be good Italian women. Because for these women, to be a good Italian woman was not to be in the home making babies. They were out there making fun of the Catholic priests. They were putting their bodies on the line of the railway tracks to stop the flow of rice. The leader of the biggest syndicate, the biggest union confederation in Italy from 1904 to 1920 was a woman, a Mondina. And I like this nationalism because it is sucio. It is not able to be taken by the fascists. It's a way of talking about what it is to be Italian, but not to give in to the dirty national, or the sort of pure nationalism that the fascists like. And you see this in other parts of the world. Even now, one organization I work with is in South Africa. It is a movement, you're not going to be able to translate this, it's a Zulu word, it's called Abahlali Basemjondolo. Abahlali Basemjondolo means people who live in shacks. And the people who live in these shack settlements all around the cities in South Africa, they come from all over South Africa, and they come from outside South Africa. And South Africa is a very xenophobic place. And still, in these shack settlements, the idea of what it is to be South African is not xenophobic. You can be from the Congo and still be South African, if you are part of the shack settlement. Now, this kind of cosmopolitan, dirty nationalism is, I think, the basis of thinking about a food sovereignty or a counter-hegemony, where it's not just about bowing to the saints of a country that our fascist leaders tell us, but instead it's about connecting different working class experiences from different places, from the countryside over here, from the rural areas over here, from the jungles, from indigenous people, from a range of different plurinational understandings of what it is to be from a place. And I think that is to take your idea of a counter-hegemonic national cuisine. It's not about letting one government say this is pure and this is not pure. The kind of national cuisine I am inspired by your comment is to imagine decolonizing a single definition of the nation and imagining instead this plurinational cuisine that is united by the people who live in the country, that rejects export agriculture and rebuilds a sort of sovereignty that sinks carbon back into the soil and cools the planet, as well as feeding everybody in the country. So we're making progress in understanding what counter-hegemony means. But how else can we imagine this? I don't know if I'm not being engaged. Was there a...
Bueno, el otro día estoy participando en una huerta y el otro día los chicos estaban haciendo suelo, me llamó mucho la atención, estaban fabricando suelo, pero guiándose por cosas que hacían en la selva, que quemaban el suelo para fabricar un suelo más rico. Como una forma quizás también rescatar esos viejos saberes que están en los pueblos originarios, que están en diferentes lados, que quizás han sido sobrepasados por lo que es la agroindustria y se han perdido saberes que quizás nos conecten con ese tipo de alimentación y con ese tipo de soberanía que se ha perdido con el tiempo. Bueno, eso. Rescato eso de lo que vi en acción en la huerta urbana, donde me emocioné mucho viendo que rescataban saberes de otro momento, de otro lugar y de otros países. Retomando eso que hacen en la selva de quemar el suelo para sacar un tipo de sustrato diferente. Bueno, eso quería decir.
I think that there is a lot of indigenous wisdom that matters right now. But how do we engage with it without stealing it like we stole the land? I mean, to say, indigenous people are fantastic and we must use indigenous knowledge to save the world, is already to have turned that knowledge into a thing, into something that can be appropriated, rather than to engage in the more difficult conversation of reparations. Because it is only through reparations that we can make good the fact that we are on stolen land here. And I think that that's, often when I hear talk about indigenous wisdom, it is in a very liberal way to imagine that the indigenous wisdom exists without actual indigenous people. That indigenous wisdom is about using a certain kind of tea, or using certain kinds of burning protocols, or using ways of harvesting wild plants for medicine, for example. As if the people the scientists who developed that, the indigenous scientists, are still not alive and are still not being persecuted. So, and again, this is a difficult conversation in the United States. Nothing will kill a room more than talking about reparations for slavery and reparations for indigenous
for the genocide of indigenous people. But if we don't have this conversation, then who are we to be talking about food sovereignty? Because again, then it's just food sovereignty for colonizers, and not food sovereignty for everybody. So, I mean, this is why when Marcos was telling me about this plurinational process, I was very excited. Because in the United States, we don't have that language yet. In fact, every day in the United States, my children go to school and they are told to recite what is called the Pledge of Allegiance, where you put your hand on your heart and you look at the flag and you say, "We are one nation under God." Do you have something like this here for children in school?
Sí.
And is it one nation under God?
No.
No, is it something else?
No.
But in the United States, we have 500 nations. There are 500 indigenous nations at least in the United States. And every day my children are taught to forget them. Right? Every day you are made to forget that you are on stolen land. With this ritual of pretending that this flag has always existed, these people have always been there, people came off the boats on virgin land and everything was just there for the taking. This is nonsense. And we practice this amnesia in America, in the United States, because it would be too horrible to recognize what is still going on to indigenous countries. So I love the idea of an indigenous way of thinking about healing. And I love that idea, and it cannot happen without indigenous people being comrades, in the same way that all the other nations that make this country need to be at the table, healing, in a process of healing that recognizes injustice, that recognizes the theft, that recognizes that indigenous people are more likely to be suffer from diabetes or suffer from to be in poverty. Certainly in the United States, that's the case. So I'm absolutely frank. Let me show. I'm going to wave a book around because this is. I was working on. This is a book that I worked on with my colleague who is a medical doctor, and this is about indigenous medicine. It hasn't yet been translated into Spanish, but the idea here is that the kinds of medicine that are being practiced around the world absolutely take knowledge and turn it into medicine as if the people behind that medicine don't exist anymore. And I think one of the most interesting story from here is about the microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you know that the microbiome is this area in your gut? You are host to billions of other beings. They're not human, but they make you possible to be alive. Now, because of the agrotoxins in our environment, many of those creatures in our gut have been killed. And it's not easy to get them back because there's no pill that you can take. But there are some people in Silicon Valley, in the United States, who are experimenting with the pure human excrement of indigenous people. And so there are anthropologists, the bad kind of anthropologists, who go and will take indigenous stool samples, turn it into pills, and people in Silicon Valley will take them as a way of taking this indigenous knowledge embodied in their microbiome and transplanting it into their guts. And this is the sort of maximum case of stealing indigenous knowledge, right? You're actually taking the poop and you're turning it into a pill and you're swallowing it as a way to put back what you have destroyed in your environment by stealing it from indigenous people. These beings then will make you much healthier and make you live forever, whatever shit that they believe. But I think it's super interesting that the way that indigenous people have looked after the environment can be turned into a commodity, can be turned into a medicine that can be taken by the Silicon Valley billionaires all of this without a commitment to actually recognizing that indigenous people are, need reparations. So again, this is a way of saying, yes, absolutely indigenous knowledge is important, but we cannot steal it. It needs to be offered and given in a process of reparation.
Hola, mi nombre es Claudia Schwartz y soy poeta.
Pero para la
traducción.
Ah, está bien.
Ahí va.
Llego, ¿no?
Sí, llego.
Bueno, perdón, con el cable. Mi nombre es Claudia Schwartz, soy poeta. Y durante la última feria del libro presentamos un libro, editora también, y presentamos un libro de Ricardo Rojas, sobre Ricardo Rojas, de Diego Barovero. Y allí, charlando en la presentación, supimos que mientras Rojas estuvo preso en Ushuaia por defender, salió a defender a Irigoyen en el golpe del 30, estuvo preso en Ushuaia, preso, tenía que presentarse 2 veces por día en la comisaría. Entonces, el resto del día andaba por ahí y estaba con los aborígenes, con los nativos. Y desde ahí empezó a aprender y a recuperar archivos acerca de la medicina de estos pueblos. Esos archivos después siguieron produciéndose en escuelas de todo el país. Parece que esos archivos existen y que son muy numerosos. Esto me lo contaba un muchacho ya grande que se crió con los curas y que se divirtió muchísimo leyendo estos archivos. Con los sapos curaban estas heridas, con las ranas, con las víboras. Extraordinario para mí escuchar de la boca de este viejo amigo, educado por los curas, cómo la cultura, centroeuropea, central, papal, ¿no? O luterana en tu cultura, ha amordazado, ¿no? Pero más allá de esto, eso existe, eso se puede averiguar e investigar porque está abierto esos archivos. Yo lo voy a averiguar y voy a trasladarles dónde están. Pero por otra parte, estuve leyendo cosas de los chinos. Los chinos también tienen una cultura médica muy antigua que se basa también en la cuestión, es una cultura agraria. Entonces también recuperan la vesícula, el cálculo de la vesícula de la vaca, y etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. Quiere decir que hay consonancias, resonancias culturales, siempre, ¿no es cierto?, mapas a seguir, mapas que hay que, redescubrir, pero que están. Bueno, eso es todo. Gracias.
Ya que estamos con el tema de la cultura ancestral y la biología, yo soy Enrique Avellá, soy médico pediatra y pertenezco a uno de los viejos afines a las cátedras libres de soberanía alimentaria. Se llaman pediatras por soberanía alimentaria. Y es muy interesante lo que dices en relación a la sabiduría de los pueblos originarios y cómo Silicon Valley recupera a través de las heces ese conocimiento en función de los avances que se ha producido impresionante con el tema de los microbiomas, con la genética, con el genoma humano. Y entonces cuento una situación que se está viviendo actualmente. La bibliografía cada vez es más amplia en términos de microbioma y ha generado un cuestionamiento filosófico sobre la centralidad de nosotros como humanos, similar a lo que fue con Galileo, o Copérnico, cuando desterraron a la Tierra del centro del universo. Y el microbioma lo que demuestra, lo que señala, es que quizás no es que estemos habitados por microbios, sino que los microbios nos habitan a nosotros. Y en ese sentido, el paralelismo que quiero señalar es que se sabe la implicancia que tiene el bioma en el curso de vida a partir del bioma que se genera en el recién nacido en función de la alimentación y en función de la vía de nacimiento. Un niño nacido por cesárea no tiene el mismo microbioma que un nacido por vía vaginal, contaminado por la vía vaginal, y que también coloniza, bueno, se sabe la vía que existe entre el intestino de la madre y la leche, etcétera, la leche materna. Y lo que se hace ahora es que en las neonatologías, por lo menos acá en Buenos Aires, en las terapias intensivas neonatales, incluso en aquellas que tienen prematuros extremos, a los niños se los coloniza con microbioma de partos vaginales para que coloricen con un microbioma diferente, por las implicancias que tiene esa fuente de información genética en la constitución del individuo y en su humanidad y su vida futura.
Como las koalas.
Yeah. Words matter. And there are two difficult words that you mentioned. One is colonizing, and the other is immunity. And I love the point that you're making, that actually, if we take this idea of the microbiome seriously, then our bodies become much more porous, they're much more permeable to the world and to other beings. But in that, the medical use of colonization is not the same as the political use of the word colonization. I mean, the idea of colonizing the gut of infants is about introducing and suffusing these two beings together, whereas colonization is always a bloody and violent affair. But the other word that I'm interested in is immunization, because we've been talking about immunity. Now everyone understands what immunity is one way or another. But I do think that it's important to understand the history of immunization. The word immunis comes from Roman colonialism. Because when Rome colonized a city, it would take over the city, but the citizens had some obligations to pay, but they were not extended the right of citizenship. And so these duties in Latin are munera. And from munera, to be immune is to be free of certain duties. And so the idea of immunity in the history of medicine comes with an idea of borders and policing. It comes from the words that we have in our language to describe how foreigners come into our bodies and then disappear are always related to the politics of our time. So there's a theory of immunity that understood the white blood cells as police. That you have these things going around your body, and they will hit over the head anything that looks like a foreigner. Right? This was, in fact, a cornerstone of medical education. And then that changes into, and it was in fact, there was a woman whose name I'm forgetting that you can remind me, who asked, well, if white blood cells go around looking for things and ejecting foreigners, then how do women get pregnant? Because you have this foreign body inside you, and your immune system has to do something different. So it can't be about foreigners, it has to be about something else. And so then you have the danger theory of immunity, right? Where what you're doing is just your immune system is looking out for danger instead of foreignness. And this is a very interesting shift. We're not now saying that we are kicking people out because they are foreign. We're now trying to evaluate danger. But even this comes from a model of understanding police and threat that was prevalent in the 1980s. So this danger theory of immunity happens at the same time as a kind of policing in New York, which was about the danger theory of crime, where one broken window means that you have to swarm a place with police in order to make it safe again. And so I'm wondering what the next stage of immunity theory is. If it's not about colonialism, and it's not about foreigners, and it's not about danger, maybe as our politics changes, our understanding of immunity will change as well. And I'm very excited about that. And I'm very excited about decentering the human being and understanding that we are a much more plural body and much more plural being than Christianity or general religion encourages us to believe. That we're much more diffuse. And I'm very excited for what that means for how we understand our bodies and understand medicine. But does that make sense? Our understanding of immunity and of colonialism have a lot to do with each other. And the more that we can transcend that historical baggage, the better our understanding of our own bodies will be.
Pensando ahora un poco en el contexto actual, ¿no? Que ya venimos asistiendo en Argentina y bueno, en un montón de lugares, capaz que seguramente en África, la avanzada del agronegocio, la avanzada de un montón de cuestiones, pero en este momento estamos como en otra faceta mucho más terrible, concretamente en Argentina estoy hablando. Están arrasando con los territorios, ¿no? Estamos quedándonos sin soberanía en los territorios. Entonces, por ahí, bueno, ¿cómo ves vos y también Miriam, por su larga experiencia, ¿no? de transitar estos contextos? Bueno, ¿qué pasa con la soberanía alimentaria? ¿Cómo seguimos? ¿Cómo hacemos, ¿no? En este contexto?
All right, I'll go first. Again, to get back to Gramsci, at the end of a period of hegemony, there is this, he calls it the interregnum. It's a time of monsters. And I think it's increasingly clear that we are at the end of a period of US hegemony. And we are moving into a different world. Now, whether that world is led by China or whether we have something completely different is the conversation I think we can be having. But in the middle, in this interregnum where the bourgeoisie have a losing grip on power and the working class doesn't have yet the capacity to be able to lead, we are in some very dark times. And I worry, because this is precisely the moment where we see rising fascism in Europe, and where food sovereignty, as I say, in France and in Italy, food sovereignty has been co-opted. since 1995, when no one was using the word food sovereignty, now food sovereignty is so important that it has been turned into a military term. And that's what France is doing. When they talk about food sovereignty, they talk about national security. And in the interregnum, if you look historically, at the end of the Italian city-states, when they were hegemonic, if you look at the end of the Dutch Empire, when it was hegemonic, if you look at the end of the British Empire, when it was running out of, at the end of its hegemony, there is an increase in the amount of weapons and an increase in the investment in security and war. It always happens. This is the work, by the way, of Giovanni Arrighi, who in the long 20th century, his book traces how different hegemons become powerful and then they lose power. So right now, I think we're in the interregnum, and we should expect to see increased militarism. Certainly in the United States, we're seeing billions of dollars more in border security spending. In Europe, of course, you see commitments now to military spending at 5% of GDP, and around the world, increased levels of military spending. And I think that's what food sovereignty is going to look like until we have a reorganization of geopolitics. Well, that's what should happen. My worry is we've also come to the end of, we're in the middle of a climate crisis. And the tricks that different hegemons used in the past to fix a crisis of hegemony by invading somewhere or by creating new frontiers, this is not possible anymore. So my great worry is that food sovereignty becomes a mechanism to justify military spending, and it becomes, we have a much more militarized food system, where our food chains are become enforced by police. We have some of that in America already. In the United States, we have the Border Patrol making sure that certain kinds of workers who work in the fields are not raided until the harvest is done, and then the police will come and take them away. But there's always the military, or the border industrial complex over the shoulders of migrant workers. And I worry that that's happening increasingly in Europe. I don't know whether it's happening here, whether there are migrant workers in the fields here. But I imagine that there are.
Sí, pero no tiene problemas de migración.
Security problem that delay will throw money at and use as an excuse to be able to increase military spending for the border that then comes to police us. So that's my worry with food sovereignty. Maybe we have a happy outcome. But you have so much experience. When you've seen this in the past, what lessons do you have for us from your experience?
Mira, yo creo que estamos, como vos decís bien, una situación difícil, sí, y que está vinculada precisamente al modo de producción. Es decir, ¿quiénes son los migrantes? ¿Quiénes son los cosechadores o los reproductores? ¿Quiénes son? Y son generalmente los sectores más desprotegidos de la sociedad. Entonces esa desprotección es extensiva a otros sectores sociales y es cada vez más preocupante, ¿no? La desprotección, precisamente, sobre todo de las mujeres y de los jóvenes, de los niños, ¿no?
I'm sorry, it's such bad news. But maybe, this is why I began with my question to you about what counter-hegemony is, right? But this is also a moment where the Mondine organized so well that even though the last Mondina harvested in the 1960s, if you go to Italy now and look where the Mondine were active politically, you'll find more women in politics in those areas. You'll find more nurseries in the cities. And you find, even years after, attitudes towards patriarchy that are much more anti-patriarchal than areas where there was no Mondina organizing. And this is 50 years after the last Mondina harvested. This kind of organizing can still persist. I think that this is also the message we need right now, that it's not just that we're in the shit, but this is an organizing opportunity if we can take it. And it is an organizing opportunity that's not just about food, but it is about the protection of women, and it is about understanding youth. But it is also about, it's the full spectrum of things. Marcos and I were just talking about La Via Campesina's Nieleni meeting that is coming up. And at this meeting, one of the key issues is that if we are interested in food sovereignty, then we must be interested in health. And if we're interested in health, then we have to be interested in indigenous visions of the future and different cosmologies. And if we're interested in that, then we must be interested in reparations and in land reform. And if we're interested in that, then we have to be interested in energy and urban housing. We have to be interested in transport. We have to be interested in lots of different areas that don't look like they're food sovereignty, but you can scratch the surface there. Everything to do with food sovereignty. You know, how does our food get to us? Who owns the transport corridors? Who makes sure that the food in hospitals is good to eat? This is, to some extent, about making new demands on the state. But it is about politicizing those demands so that it can't be taken by the right, so that it's only citizens who get to eat and not migrants. Only citizens who get to go to university and not migrants, whatever it is. There is a political moment here for us to insert ourselves if we have a united front. And this united front, I think, is this is the politics that beat apartheid in South Africa. And it is the politics that beat the fascists. It is a front between workers in different areas. And again, I'm excited to learn what that front looks like in Argentina.
¿Quién va a hablar?
Sí, en cuanto a tu trabajo como divulgador, mi pregunta es, para quienes puedan estar interesados en hacer algo similar en relación a todo este conjunto de temas, poder simplificarlo y llegar a la gente en medio de un contexto en el que la derecha tiene muchas estrategias de simplificación y de divulgación de sus ideas locas y bueno, y también una manera de enganchar a los más chicos, digamos, de embelezarlos con los celulares, las maravillas de Marte, el mercado, etc. ¿Qué consejos le darían a las personas que están acá, que ya más o menos estamos de acuerdo con tu discurso y tu forma de ver, como para poder activar eso en cuanto a divulgación, como algunos tips, algunos consejos?
Well, thank you for the question. I mean, this is where I have been experimenting myself. I think the key word we could leave here with is experiment. I spent 10 years making a documentary film, which hopefully will be screened here at some point. And I thought, look, if only people can see this documentary, everything's going to change. Nothing works that way. The journey of the film is about an agroecological farmer from Malawi who learns how to fight patriarchy, and then she makes men recognize our patriarchy, and she does it in a really interesting way, and the households where she works become very equal, much better places. And she uses this trick to convince people about climate change. This is in Malawi, and she realizes America isn't learning about climate change. She must come to America. So we followed her to America, and she has a journey there. So this documentary is a way of flipping on its head a certain kind of script about, we must go to the third world and we must help them. But no, this is about Malawi coming to America and saving America. The film itself is available on public television, but the success that we have had with it is not in just screening it and letting it be on the media. The success we had was when we wrote sermons for pastors, for the religious leaders, and they showed it to their congregations, and we measured the congregation that didn't really care about Africa or didn't care about climate change. Over the course of these sermons, by the end of it, they were fundraising for Africa, and they were writing to their elected representatives, and they were very concerned about climate change. So for me, the lesson there is not that we shouldn't do these media interventions. I think they're important, but the organizing around them is much more important, right? So you can have TikTok, and we can have some fantastic left TikTok star, but that's no good. That's just entertainment. Seeing your leftist TikTok star while you're scrolling and watching other things is just like, oh yeah, that Malay's a bastard, and then you scroll. That doesn't change the world. It's a little moment of satisfaction where you are in the same media environment as people you like. But the only winner there is TikTok. It's not leftist organizing even. And so where I see us doing well is where we have face-to-face meetings like this. And we have to recruit. And the way we recruit is through joy and through pleasure and through fun, as well as meeting the needs of people every day. This is the big example that my favorite social movement, I think, in history is the Black Panthers. So the Black Panthers were a group in the United States. Do you raise your hands if you've heard of the Black Panthers? Okay. How many people were in the Black Panthers? Just take a guess. I mean, how many, you've heard of this organization? 500 people. 500, and they were mostly under 30. If you look at the membership list, it's 500 kids. And yet they understood that in order to be able to do their work, initially they walked around and they monitored the police, carrying guns. But the real vision was in providing for the needs of the community. And so they had what were called survival programs. And there were 40 different things that were part of this program. In Houston, near where I live, the big things were providing free school lunches where men were doing the cooking, and this was a very conscious intervention against patriarchy. And it was also about pest control, because in Houston the cockroaches are big, and so providing pest control as a service from the movement. A movement pest control service, it doesn't sound like it's very promising, but because they understood that actually for people to have dignity, right, to be able to feel like you're not living in a cockroach-infested home is important. So the dignity that people needed rested on having pest control. So the Black Panthers killed cockroaches. And they did that so that people could have dignity as a way of surviving for now, pending revolution. And you wouldn't think that killing cockroaches is a revolutionary activity. But in the right context, when you recognize that actually this is part of your service to the community so that you can build power, killing cockroaches is much better than a book. It ends up being the story that connects you to a lived understanding of the working class that is much better than having the TikTok guy, right? The TikTok guy is not going to kill a cockroach for you. But if the Black Panthers are there to carry your shopping up the stairs, if they are there to make you feel safe at night, if they are there to find some shoes for you, shoes was a big issue. So finding footwear was one of the survival programs. This is the kind of face-to-face engagement. We don't need to be in a room to be face-to-face. We can be killing cockroaches for each other. We can be, you know, or whatever it is that is needed in the community at the time. And different communities will need different things. But think of that, 500 people under the age of 30 were able to get the US government to transform, and not just the US government, but it was an international effort. They produced their own media, the Black Panther newspaper. It's incredible, you can read it today and learn more about the world than you can from reading any bourgeois newspaper. Because they not only wrote about, you know, the police and the violence, but they wrote about liberation struggles around the world, they wrote about strikes over here, and they also gave you guides. One of the things in the Black Panther newspaper was how to go into a store and ask the shopkeeper for a donation so that we could feed the children. It was line by line, they tell you how to do it. And they tell you, you know, you dress smart, you present yourself, and you explain where the food is going to go, and you invite the shopkeeper, and it worked. And I think these kinds of engagements help us understand that media is important, but the social organizing around the media and changing those spaces of social organization can be radically different. So maybe I can offer that is, you know, yes, we can simplify it, but there's no one turns up for a lecture, except you guys. But no one turns up for a lecture, but people will hear politics because people live politics every day if you meet them where they are. And I think the Black Panthers understood that very well, and that's why these programs were about survival pending revolution, and why revolutionary cooking is definitely part of the vision.
Siempre lo micro y lo macro es lo mismo. Confío mucho en la homeopatía, en las pequeñas acciones y la importancia que tienen. Y como semillera, más que nunca, estoy muy al tanto de eso, ¿no? Como viajan las semillas tan pequeñas y crecen donde sea. Entonces no puedo ser agricultora y ser pesimista, o sea, es una contradicción. Acá donde vivimos, es una tierra muy fértil, sobra alimento en realidad, porque vas caminando por las calles y puedes ir comiendo. Entonces la idea es involucrarnos, como en mi caso soy agricultora urbana y mi implicancia donde hago huerta es muy grande. Vienen desde turistas franceses con mucho dinero hasta personas de la Villa 31, que todos conviven en el mismo lugar y solo la huerta puede unir estos mundos. Tenemos desde el narcotraficante, todo tipo de, nos reunimos todos los seres. Es así en todas las huertas comunitarias, en todas. Entonces, la siembra es muy efectiva. Hoy de hecho nos reíamos porque uno de los voluntarios estudiaba agronomía muy convencido, era del interior y ahora está estudiando PBO, producción vegetal orgánica, y la mayoría de las personas que vienen a la huerta dicen, esta huerta me cambió la vida. Y digo, es un lugar muy pequeño de 30 metros cuadrados. Yo misma en mi PH, en lugar de quedarme sola, en el 2020 hablé con mis vecinas y vecinos, que solo nos saludábamos y comenzamos a hacer compras comunitarias de alimentos agroecológicos. hablaba la locura, ¿no? De las elecciones, los políticos, o sea, seguir perdiendo energía en un lugar de locura me parece que no va a hacer crecer nada. Como siento, como taurina, súper práctica, hay que hacer las cosas ya, o sea, no quiero un día de siembra, ¿sí? O sea, siembro corazones constantemente desde que nací. Teniendo el abuelo agricultor. Entonces todo me resulta muy fácil. Y ver esto me conmueve. Cada persona que prueba un fruto cultivado desde el amor se conmueve. Entonces eso nos hermana y no hay mucho que hacer.
I'm very grateful for that, and Sagittarius. But I'm excited about the process there, where, I mean, a lot of late capitalism makes us feel very alone, and this, you know, in the United States, we have an epidemic of loneliness. The idea of a community farm is absolutely important to be able to start getting rid of that, treating this very real social disease. But I also think that sometimes as political activists we can feel very alone. We can feel like, you know, we're just fighting this one fight and how are we going to win? And again, Marcos and I were talking a little earlier about this, the need to have these networks and to have these these exchanges. In South Africa, in the shack settlements, the reason that there are agroecological farms is because the MST sent a delegation many years ago, and the MST made it possible for people to start learning agroecological farming, and then took some of those farmers to their training center near Sao Paulo and started educating more about socialism. And the political content of the farming became very important. Again, I mean, it's like the cockroaches. Killing cockroaches isn't necessarily a socialist activity. Farming doesn't have to be a socialist activity, but it can be. And in the moment where it is, you feel much less alone, because it is part of this international, you know, like the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation tries to see. These kinds of international connections are really important in banishing that political sense of loneliness that I think many of us are feeling right now. And again, it's so exciting for me to come from Texas, where politics is very difficult in Texas. Almost every fight that I fight in Texas, I lose. Because the Republicans are much more powerful there. They've won as many battles as they can, and whenever we win something small, they smack it away. It gets tiring after a while, and I honestly get quite emotional, and I feel broken by it. And then I come here and I see the struggle, and it makes me feel like, look, even if you're not winning every day here, at least I feel less alone. And I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful for you. Because I think that there is this understanding that we must be part of this sort of socialist international, because otherwise we will hang apart. But let's hang together. So thank you.
Seguimos, ¿no? Sí, claro. Esta es la sección, todo lo que siempre le quisiste preguntar a Raj Patel, la oportunidad de preguntarle a Andrea Graciano, aproveche la oportunidad. Dale. Bueno, voy a contar una cosita antes. Está Perla Erro, nuestra querida Perla Erro, regalándonos una vez más una gastronomía para la liberación que le contaba Raj. Y lo que ustedes no saben es que esto que hacemos acá en el museo, de la cena sana, segura, soberana y sabrosa, la canasta, después de cada actividad, es una idea de este señor, de Raj Patel. Así que aplausos para él. De hecho, cuando nos conocimos en el 2010 me contó justamente una experiencia en Austin que se llamaba esto de Cook, Eat, Talk, ¿no? Las tres cosas. Y dijimos, qué bueno, ¿no? Que cada actividad que hacemos acá en el museo termine con una comida, una canasta, recuperar esa comensalidad y también con la posibilidad a veces de que alguien cocine, nos regale esa cocina como práctica revolucionaria ciertamente en este espacio. Así que eso es de Raj.
Sobre todo porque es volver a la cocina. Y yo siempre digo que estar en la cocina es tener la sartén por el mango y el mango también. Es realmente un acto revolucionario participar, no es el hecho de la negación o poner la cocina en un plano secundario, al contrario, es lo que motiva la comensalidad, es lo que motiva el diálogo entre la gente, es lo que motiva las formas de organización que tenemos entre nosotros para superar esa soledad de la que habla Raj Patel. Es decir, nosotros tenemos un modo distinto no te diría de vivir, sino de, pues sí, de vivir, en el sentido de que la comensalidad, la comunicación entre nosotros es una característica de nuestro país. Y si nosotros somos solidarios de por sí, nosotros somos amigos, compañeros, y nos encontramos siempre en todas las batallas, sea justa, sea injusta, hay más de una que de la otra. Hoy es martes, mañana hay una, ¿no? No sé si nos van a apoyar. Creo que esta forma de lucha está abriendo un camino que nos está diciendo basta los niveles, porque realmente se va sumando a la de mañana, por ejemplo, a los jubilados se van a sumar los hinchas de fútbol, se van a sumar en las comunidades, se van sumando, y cuando se van sumando, se van transformando en una verdadera fuerza transformadora. Esa fuerza transformadora que tiene el objetivo, ponerle límites a este fascismo moderno que tenemos, que se expresa de distintas maneras, como decía Raj Patel. Una de las formas de expresión es hacer que nos sintamos solos, que estemos aparentemente solos y no estamos en comunidad como estamos ahora. Es decir, somos solidarios de por sí, somos amigos, compañeros, y nos encontramos en todas las luchas, por razones nobles, y a lo mejor no tan nobles, pero por lo menos con el espíritu de lucha para cambiar las cosas. Y si hay algo hoy, en una entrevista que me hicieron temprano, me preguntaban qué mensaje les daba a la juventud. Que no deje de luchar, que no baje los brazos. Eso, que en la época fue consigna de lucha, no deje de luchar. Con un gobierno democrático y popular, pero sí, no dejemos de luchar, no dejemos de juntarnos, no dejemos de entrelazar nuestros brazos, precisamente para derrotar a todos los que nos quieren derrotar, pero sobre todo para construir una sociedad, yo no voy a decir más justa, porque ya no lo es, pero una sociedad justa, sí, una sociedad justa, solidaria, amigable, donde todos compartamos el pan, donde todos compartamos la sopa, que esté viviendo ahí que tiene nada más.
volver a esta idea de la contrahegemonía, ¿no? Y pensando en redes sociales, que hablabas recién de TikTok, que creo que lo contrahegemónico y el desafío que tenemos es habitar esos espacios, porque en realidad muchos de esos espacios no son ajenos, pero son muchas veces esas redes las que, por ejemplo, nos permitieron que hoy seamos tantos y que se haya organizado de ayer a hoy, ¿no? O sea, digo, como que me parece que el desafío por ahí es hacer uso de estos medios hegemónicos para poder proponer algo distinto, pero por ahí no, porque a veces lo contrahegemónico por ahí lo pensamos como si fuese la vida de enfrente, y creo que el desafío es poder entender ese lenguaje para habitar esos espacios y poder después proponer algo distinto, pensando por ejemplo en la cátedra también, la propuesta este año de la cátedra de soberanía alimentaria en la Escuela de Nutrición fue el regreso a la presencialidad con un espacio de intercambio y construcción de saberes con estas redes, porque después tenemos fenómenos como Milei que lograron lo que lograron, digamos, por TikTok, que muchas veces ahora no los colonizan estos sujetos y por ahí no estamos teniendo esas conversaciones. Creo que tenemos el enorme desafío de entender cómo funcionan esas plataformas y demás y poder tener una presencia ahí para poder plantear algo distinto. No sé, es como un poco lo que me quedo pensando en esto de lo contrahegemónico, como para seguir la conversación.
Sobre todo cuando vos entendés lo importante que es que estudiante de nutrición, estudiante de nutrición una vez por semana cocine para los sin techo. Eso significa 200 raciones, no es pagada. Pero no es pagada precisamente que el estudiante de nutrición, cuya función específica sobre, digamos, hablar de la alimentación sana, segura y soberana, le ejercite con los más desprotegidos. Entonces esto hace a las redes sociales, esto hace a las cadenas solidarias, y esto hace a lo que es para mí lo más alto del espíritu humano, que nos hace humanos, que es eso.
I think that's right. You can't eat social media. And you're right, of course, that leaving those spaces entirely to the right is a problem. But imagining that the politics that we need will come from TikTok is also a problem. I don't think that we should be looking for the Messiah on TikTok. And you know, some sort of leftist chat show host with high cheekbones and a good TV presence to be able to explain politics.
No bajar los brazos, pelear. No bajar los brazos, pelear, luchar. Yo creo que todo lo que disfrutamos en la humanidad, sobre todo lo bueno, lo hemos conseguido luchar. Nadie nos ha regalado nada. Pero en distintas épocas, en distintas situaciones, en distintos grupos sociales, las cosas se consiguieron luchando. Y por eso el mensaje más importante es este: no bajar los brazos, estar abierta, tener un buen derecho y por supuesto proteger lo que se ha conseguido. Esto que decía, nosotros somos una sociedad un poco diferente a la sociedad norteamericana. Nosotros no estamos solos. Nosotros somos, digamos, solidarios y copartícipes de lo bueno y de lo malo que nos rodea. Entonces, por ahí lo que nos pasa, a veces nos pasa a un nivel y nos pasa. Y somos responsables a veces de lo que nos pasa. Pero también encontramos el camino del atajo, encontramos el camino de parar la mano, ¿no? Pare. Ahí hay un cartel grande por ahí que decir pare, pare. Sí, pare la mano porque estamos, digamos, sensibles a proteger nuestros derechos a conquistar nuevos derechos, pero sobre todo a hacer que el fascismo no avance.
And I mean, if there is a way.
Justamente hace unos días participé en un seminario y justamente tiene total vigencia. Espero que sus 11 años de preso me permitieron avisorar y fundamentar toda una línea política revolucionaria en la ciudad. El mundo sobre la base de los
I have a lot to say there. First, yes, I think to the social media question, there is a disciplined use of social media. Every movement I know will use WhatsApp to organize a meeting in a hurry, or Instagram if you have a little bit more time, or Twitter if you want to reach the bourgeois media, or Facebook if you want to reach your granddad. I mean, you use different things for different purposes. But I think it would be a mistake to lead with the social media. The social media must be the reason you come to the meeting. It's not the substitute for the meeting. And but that's right. Marx and Engels never shared the vision of a communist future, but they did have in the German ideology, they have this very short description of an unalienated life, where you would hunt in the morning, and then you would fish in the afternoon, and then at night you would do criticism. And this is the unalienated life they imagined. And men going out and eating meat and then offering their opinions is, we have that in America already, right? This is meat-eating bros who are following a keto diet, and then they're podcasters. I don't think that there's even Marx and Engels, I think, didn't represent accurately the need in a post-capitalist future for connections, for a life away from certainly not away from a screen, but a life together, building together. In Marx and Engels' communist future, there don't seem to be any women. There doesn't seem to be any maintenance. There don't seem to be any children. There's no eating together. You're just, in their vision, it looks like they're just roasting fish and beef, and then writing letters to their friends. And this is a very boring communist future. I think that the future we need is the cooperative one that involves joy and pleasure. And I don't think social media is good for that. I think social media in general is bad for creating joy and pleasure of the kind that we would much rather have eating this food. So I think social media.
Yo digo, en los días que corren, hay una cantidad de confusiones en el movimiento de militancia política, por lo menos aquí en Argentina. Las teorías de la revolución de otro tiempo están colapsadas, no tienen el modo de abordar el Estado, el modo de... Todavía este espacio hermoso, hay muchísima gente en Argentina haciendo esto que estamos haciendo aquí, no quiero desalentarlo, pero todavía hay un tironeo, me parece, hacia las formas tradicionales de, se supone, que hacen la política. Y nosotros quedamos medio como que estamos por fuera. Digo, yo creo que esto es profundamente político, discutir la comida, discutir la distribución de comida sana y suficiente, discutir la ciudad, ¿qué hacemos con estas moles de ciudades? Porque, ¿para dónde vamos con esto? Esta ciudad es un fruto del salario, pero el salario está en decadencia, está retrocediendo. Digo, hay un montón de preguntas y muchas veces nos tironean. Lo que sí tiene este espacio es que encarna la política, porque lo otro es una mediación a través de formas estatales y que me parece que, pero que también tenemos que asumir la política en mayúscula, porque esto es política, claramente, lo que hacemos. Nada, una reflexión porque en estos días participé de algunas reuniones, todo el mundo está contra la ley, sí, bueno, pero después aparecen los que también fueron repudiados, ¿no? Por algo no mi ley, ¿no? Por algo de nuestro tipo. Los que producen, los que tienen un mismo corte de producción, distribución y consumo de este sistema. La ampliación de las fronteras ojeras se dio en los gobiernos autodenominados progresistas. La ampliación de la explotación minera se dio mediante los gobiernos progresistas. La ampliación vaca muerta, toda la explotación de fracking en Argentina, lo impulsaron esos gobiernos.
La deforestación.
Y la deforestación, claro. Entonces, yo lo que quiero, me preocupa, digamos, o me ocupa, pensar esto otro, este horizonte del que hablas contrahegemónico, del socialismo, que es también un término hoy a discutir, ¿no? Socialistas acá son algunos que son unos bandidos, pero bueno, claro. Entonces me parece mucho para seguir discutiendo. Coincido que hay que salir de las redes, por lo menos en una cantidad de cosas. Nosotros contamos todo por la red, todo. Todo es Zoom, todo es Meet, bueno, que quedó una deformación del momento del encierro, pero contamos todo. Entonces me parece que hay que tener cuidados. Esta maquinaria que tiene el Estado, que puede hacer mucho daño, que está haciendo mucho daño, caminar un camino amoroso, deseante, para otra cosa. Tenemos que seguir pensando en cómo le entramos a esto, cómo le entramos a esto nuevo. Yo creo que acá hay latente buena parte de la buena gente que está pensando en otra cosa. Y en eso yo soy súper optimista, con los años militantes que tengo.
Todos somos parte de la buena.
Así es.
¿Qué tal? Buenas noches. Yo soy Luis Blas, yo soy investigador del CONICET, que es es el centro de ciencia más importante de Argentina, pero además está siendo muy cuestionado. Soy sociólogo, vengo de las ciencias sociales. Y leí tu libro con mucha atención hace muchos años, Obesos y Famélicos, y creo que lo leí no como una señal de advertencia, sino para entender cómo un sistema que no debería funcionar, funciona. Y el libro es muy bueno, y no lo digo de forma provocativa, sino el libro tiene muchas advertencias que nos harían pensar por qué el agronegocio no debería funcionar, y sin embargo funciona. Vengo de los estudios de la ciencia, la tecnología y sociedad, por eso la noción de funcionamiento construido. Y tengo dos preguntas. Una es, creo que la contrahegemonía de la que estabas hablando hoy nos cuesta pensarla porque también nos co-construimos con los alimentos. Nosotros estamos pensando desde el instituto no en la noción de soberanía alimentaria, sino de soluciones alimentarias. Y una solución puede ser una política pública, no tiene por qué tener materialidad. Creo que esto surgió en la charla. Pero sin embargo, un alimento siempre tiene que tener materialidad, siempre tiene que ser un artefacto. Y estamos pensando los alimentos como tecnologías. Todo alimento es una tecnología, es un alimento mínimamente procesado. Una banana cuando se corta de un árbol, por el solo hecho de cortarla, para nosotros es un artefacto. Entonces, creo que esa es una de las cuestiones, no sé si vos estuviste pensando en esta noción de co-construcción, porque obesos y famélicos en definitiva son dos caras del mismo problema. Esa es una pregunta. Y la otra es si seguís pensando que el sistema agroalimentario global sigue teniendo esa forma de reloj de arena. Porque en el caso argentino, sobre todo para los alimentos industrializados, pareciera ser un martillo. Muy pocos productores en la base que producen esos commodities, cada vez menos mano de obra. Unos pocos distribuidores, igual que en tu reloj de arena, y cada vez más consumidores. A pesar de que en Argentina el consumo de alimentos ultraprocesados se incrementa a medida que suben los ingresos. Y eso creo que es una particularidad respecto de lo que vos presentabas. El problema es que nosotros tenemos ultraprocesados para ricos y ultraprocesados para pobres. Pero bueno, te quería preguntar si seguías pensando eso, si que esa forma del sistema sigue siendo la misma o con el correr del tiempo pensás que hay otra forma. Muchas gracias.
Well, what a lovely set of questions. Let me go backwards. Because of the war on migrants in the United States, you're seeing increasing amounts of robots for the fields. So, for those of you who don't remember, in Stuff and Starve, there's the hourglass shape is there's 8 billion people who eat, and there are hundreds of millions of farmers, farm workers, and then between there's just a few corporations, so it's like a lot and a little and a lot, right? What we're seeing, I think it's true that the number of farm workers will in future through robotics be shrunk if industrial agriculture continues. And so it may tend towards this hammer shape rather than the base. But still, it's much cheaper to have an undocumented migrant harvest than it is to have a robot do that. And it's the economics that is driving this system, and that's why, for now, the hourglass shape is real. But the way that this system works is by making us think about food as a commodity, as something that we don't have to care about. And this is why, again, this question of indigenous worldview is quite important. Because if this food is your relation, if it is a cousin, if it is something to whom you have an obligation, then it stops being the kind of thing that you can put into this, this capitalist cosmology. And I like the idea that in our process of plurinationalism, we might come to look at our food very differently, as not as something that is engineered to make us finish it without even paying attention, but to something that we respect as a fellow being on our journey in the planet. And again, I mean, when we're thinking about health, or we're thinking about the future of this counter-hegemony, the material interpretation of the world matters. So we need the stories, but we need the stuff. We need both. And that brings me to your series of questions around the politics of those stories. And how do we tell those, how do we bring these politics together? Certainly in the US and in other parts of the world, there are cities where there is some very progressive politics. And I found that quite useful, where the mayor will run not as a Democrat or as a Republican, but as a democratic socialist. So in Chicago, the mayor is a very young democratic socialist, and he has the control of the city. Similarly, in Boston, in the US, there's a very progressive mayor. I like that idea that independent of party politics, there are more people from this room running as members of the government. But it's true that, you know, Millet and fascists will operate around cities. They will break our connection to rural areas. They will foment distrust between the capital city and the hinterland. And that's why counter-hegemony is about these alliances. Again, the Black Panthers worked with the United Farm Workers. So in California, when grape pickers were being destroyed by agro-industry, the Black Panthers marched in solidarity. There was understanding that rural and urban struggles are linked. And you're right that the liberals have been destroying the environment. And they've been letting these corporations do what they want. But I think that that's the interesting moment that we're in. Because what Millet and what Trump and what Modi and what any number of the Orban, what they all show is that you can do a lot more with the state than the liberals ever tried to do. You won't believe. I mean, again, this gets to this make America healthy again. The liberals in America would sort of say, well, you know, maybe we should be eating organic if you can afford it, but let the poor people eat shit. And it took this crazy right-wing guy to say, no, we are being poisoned, our bodily fluids are being contaminated by these, you know, by these agricultural corporations. Now, again, as I say, I think that that's a fascist approach. But it's amazing that you can now just shut these fuckers down. You know, you can do much more with politics than the liberals ever allowed you to believe. And if that's true, then what comes next can be much more interesting. We don't have to go back to the Peronism of small incrementalism and large betrayals. Right? We don't have to do that anymore. Because you can see that in the hands of a lunatic, the state can be completely transformed. And I think that's also why this counter-hegemony in this crazy interregnum is important. Because the reconfiguration of state forces with the right kind of political party and the right people in government can yield something quite interesting. My favorite example right now is in India, where there are, in the state of Andhra Pradesh, there are 5 million farmers. Right now, 1 million are agroecological farmers, and the vision is by 2034 that all 5 million farmers will be agroecological farmers. So right now, these 4 million are farming with agrotoxins, and they are being supported by the Ministry of Agriculture. And what the government has decided is that you're going to create a different institution. You'll have the Ministry of Agriculture that deals with subsidies and agrotoxins. And then you have this new institution that is about taking the farmers from the old place and bringing them into the new agroecological vision. And so you have bits of the government fighting each other on purpose, where you let this one die, but you can't just get rid of it, because these farmers depend on the subsidies and they depend on the agrotoxins. You have to just move them with love and patience away from agrotoxins into this other world. But you have to let this die slowly as you let the new one be born. And I like that model in India. It's worked in a couple of other places. Interestingly, it's worked in the United States with a couple of policies. And I wonder whether this is also, when we think about the vision for the future for this counter-hegemony, that we recognize, look, we're living in the wreckage of fascism. We have to destroy this organization from within so we can create the instruments of the state that we need. But I think we can only do that if we are politically well organized. And the way to do that is to have these difficult conversations on the left, where you have your Trotskyists over here and your Maoists here and your Stalinists over there, and we have to have the honest conversations that allow compromise. on the left. But it is possible in those spaces to say, look, we can suspend our differences for now as part of a united front, because that's the only thing that has ever beaten fascism. And so then let's suspend those differences. You can still be Maoist, and you can still be Stalinist, and you can still be Trotskyist, that's fine. But for now, can we agree on just one candidate who is going to take this bastard down? And then we will continue in our united front. But these kinds of politics can and do work. And as I say, if we're thinking about apartheid or fascism, this is the only thing that seems to have worked anyway.
Vamos a seguir hasta las 2 de la mañana, aparte, ¿eh?
Bueno, es una pregunta muy puntual respecto a lo que estabas contando de Kennedy y de por qué plantea el tema de los tóxicos. Eso no se entiende bien. Me pareció, o sea, se puede entender por qué la ultraderecha toma un discurso negacionista con cambio climático o con la cuestión de aborto y demás, pero no se entiende por qué plantean el tema de los tóxicos ellos.
Hitler was a vegetarian.
Sí.
Why was he a vegetarian? I mean, as a vegetarian myself, it's always very difficult. When I was in college, in school, my friends were like, "You can't be vegetarian, Hitler was a vegetarian." And there is a coincidence of a certain kind of politics. My politics about vegetarianism are about animal sentience and about the workers who are destroyed in the process of making meat, and about the environmental concerns. And the idea of bodily purity from the right is a very old idea. The idea of a pure blood and a pure soil is the... It is not, again, that is a sort of Nazi way of thinking about things. So, have you seen the film Dr. Strangelove? It's a Stanley Kubrick movie about how the world ends. But there's a character in there who is very concerned about his precious bodily fluids being contaminated by communism. And this idea of bodily purity is something that has a very long history on the right. And this is why you have right-wing approaches to organic food, is because you don't want to be poisoned. And certainly in some of the far-right literature on agribusiness, the line goes like this, that the agribusiness is poisoning you. Who owns the agribusinesses? It's the banks. Who owns the banks? It's the Jews. Right? And you can read this in some of the far-right texts. And so this is the Nazi reasoning that gets you from from this sort of anti-Semitism to keeping your bodily fluids clean. But I also don't agree with you now about Aryans. Oh, that's right, Aryans, yeah. But I also don't agree with you now about climate change. Why do you think that Donald Trump wants Greenland and Canada and the Panama Canal if he doesn't believe that actually... But he wants these places because he recognizes that there is going to be trans-Arctic shipping because climate change is real. Right? If you look at Donald Trump's security plan, it is based around a new Arctic shipment economy that only makes sense if climate change is real. So he may think, and he will say that, oh, the batteries are a Chinese conspiracy. But it's a Chinese conspiracy, it's not an environmental conspiracy anymore. And you see eco-fascism being a very real thing now, where you're policing the borders, and again, this gets to food sovereignty, right? If you are an eco-fascist, you want to guard your national resources for you and your people. And you want to project your power into Greenland or Canada for the white people of the United States. So this eco-fascism is very real, and Donald Trump is doing what you would expect eco-fascists to do if they concede that climate change is real, but they don't want to do anything about it. They're happy to let climate change melt the Arctic as long as they control the world afterwards. So I do think that the right is coming to a view that climate change is real, in which food sovereignty is the military answer to the climate catastrophe that will destroy our food system. If you are powerful and you bring guns to your shipping lanes, then it doesn't matter if there are no glaciers and there's no Arctic ice cap. Your military will make sure that the food gets to you, and you will do what is required to get that food. That's what I'm worried about right now, because, as I say, they are worried about agrotoxins from a Nazi point of view, but they're worried about climate change from a national security point of view, in which food sovereignty is a very important signifier.
Hi, how are you? I would like to ask you, what do you think about the idea of, instead of expanding the fields or crops, improving the products, and so there can be more to use instead of deforesting trees or forests. Also, by using technologies like biogenetic, to improve these products, so you can have more. Or, for example, if you wanted oranges in the past, you had to wait till it was in season, so you can block them. But now you can find it in every season because of these new technologies. What do you think about it?
Thank you for that question and for being here today. I love science, and I think that our heroes here loved science as well. The kinds of science that can demonstrably feed the world are the kinds of agroecological approach that are resilient to climate change. I mean, genetic engineering is a 20th century technology that was invented in a period of climate stability, and it was invented by the pesticide companies in order to move and sell more agrotoxins. So you could say, well, you're not talking about this agrotoxin business, you're talking about people's genetic engineering of oranges. And I think that then we need to think about where we put our resources when it comes to science. And do we try and engineer an orange tree that provides oranges all the time? Even if then we are relying on a monoculture of oranges, or do we have a portfolio of plants in the field? Because climate change is bringing great uncertainty to the fields. You never know whether there's going to be a catastrophic storm, or if there's going to be a new pest or a new disease that comes. And with this radical uncertainty, the kinds of genetic engineering that we are capable of can't keep up. And the good news is that we have other kinds of science that are really good at being able to provide a diversity of crops. One of my, again, this in India, in Andhra Pradesh, they realized that they needed a way to persuade farmers to shift from conventional agriculture to agroecological farming. And one of the problems if you're growing oranges and you have to wait for harvest season is that you've got a whole chunk of time where you're not making money. Right? You're waiting for the harvest, and so you're sitting there waiting for this thing to grow, and until the fruit come, there's no money for you. So they invented a kind of farming called ATM farming. And the ATM is anytime money. So the ATM farming means at any given time there are 26 different cash crops in the fields, plus more around the edges that are not cash crops but are there to attract insects or to flood control or something else. 26 different crops, and at any time one of those crops is ready for harvest. So you always have income, and this was a revelation to farmers who previously had to wait for one harvest season and they get all their money, and when they get their money the prices are low because every farmer is getting the crop at the same time. And so with this ATM system, you have a system that is always providing money. And we've seen in India, there was catastrophic cyclones. There was a cyclone called Cyclone Michuan, which happened in 2022. And for conventional farmers, even with hybrid crops, they were wiped out. But these anytime money farms recovered very, very quickly. And because they hadn't sunk all these inputs into them, people still made money. So I think the invitation for this moment is to think much more widely about science, and not the kind of small 20th century science where you're fiddling with a plant, but a 21st century science that recognizes the climate catastrophe and recognizes we want not just one thing, we want all of it. We want diversity, and that diversity is our best bet against climate. Monoculture is one bet on one crop, and in an uncertain time you're very unwise to take that. Whereas if you are generating a portfolio, then even if there is a catastrophe, you're much more likely to recover. And that kind of science, I think, is the science of the 21st century. And it's much more exciting, I think, and it tastes better. But thank you for the question.
What you're saying is that we don't need, we do need new technologies, but I think the most important idea that you gave me is that we, most than good technology that we need, we need a good system that could carry itself along the ages or along the time and catastrophes.
But it's just a quick follow-up. I think we're hung up on the word technology because when we think of technology, you think of this is technology. But girls' education is not a technology. Well, why not? Why is it not a technology to educate girls in sub-Saharan Africa? If the technology is some trick that makes productivity increase, then actually girls' education is a really good technology. It increases productivity and it has very long consequences in terms of soil health and in terms of family income. But we're not allowed to call education policy a technology, but we are allowed to call this a technology. And I wonder whether we can think of technologies that are not patented as skilled technology. If we think of indigenous science as science, then all of a sudden it's not merely that indigenous people have these bacteria in their poop, but it is the worldview in which indigenous communities have stewarded the life on Earth in different ways. And we should call that a technology, and we should call it science. So it's not just the genetic engineering that's the science, it's the combination of crops together, it is the understanding of the seasons, it is
a mixture of social and physical sciences together that we need. And these are the kinds of technologies we need for the 21st century. That's a clarification of the technology.
Bueno, si el futuro es ancestral, el secreto lo tienen quienes son los seres de la Tierra. Estando mano a mano con Nancy de Bolivia, es mi gran maestra de la huerta, aprendo día a día un montón. Y también de algunos maestros de otros tiempos. Y lo primero que aplico en mí, y que puedo decir acá, es que sigo el ritmo del sol. Desde que sigo ese ritmo, mis parásitos son menores, tengo menos. Al tener menos parásitos y tomar café o diente de león, voy a la acción, no me quedo en la queja ni en momentos donde yo era puro papo mental. Entonces, a partir de esa vivencia propia, compartirla, muchas cosas cambian. Entonces creo que siempre lo micro y el macro, lo temático, es si somos parte de un cosmos, y es tan claro que lo somos, y somos como ese tejido, ¿no? Si cada uno se diferencia del otro, es como tener una lata de porotos, que cada poroto diga soy especial, que no tiene sentido. Entonces creo que cuanto más veamos la red que nos une, y más integremos lo dual, ¿no? El otro, Milen, el Pacho, y no encontrar en nosotros eso, más nos va a costar. Entonces, creo que desde una mirada amorosa, todo se puede. Hay un hombre que en el tren vendía unas gallinitas que hacía con cartón hace años, tenía 15 años, y cada vez que él vendía esas gallinitas, con rollo de papel higiénico y hacía un sonido que realmente era de una gallina, lo vendía a todo el mundo, porque todo el mundo podía ver como un hombre había hecho una gallina muy perfecta con algo tan simple. Y cada vez que se bajaba del tren y gritaba, recuerden, solo el amor salvará al mundo. Y ahí bajaba. Y eso mismo lo vi centenares de veces yendo para el Tigre. Cuestión que eso me quedó grabado en la mente y en el corazón. Y creo que es más simple de lo que creemos. Insisto en el poder de la siembra, insisto en el poder del sol, nuestro padre, nuestra madre la Pachamama, e integrar como seres ancestrales que somos todos, no solo Nancy de Bolivia, sino que seguramente los ancestros existen y son de nuestra red todos, y como humanos, integrar y este rito sagrado que nos une cada día a despertar, a alimentarnos, ser conscientes de que comemos, porque eso que comemos es una elección política, y si sabemos que quien provee nuestro alimento es un ser que dedica su vida y su pasión a honrar la tierra, ese alimento es sagrado y por ende nuestros alimentos, nuestros pensamientos y todo se va a alimentar. Es tal cual. Entonces acá en este lugar tenemos alimento sagrado, seguro y soberano cada reunión. En la Feria de Agronomía también conociendo a los profesores en vivo, el que hace el queso de cabra y el queso de su casa, y aprender a hacerlo con él, en real de hecho. Es todo muy simple. Entonces también pregunto a todos acá, si cada cual se hace cargo de sus residuos, si cada cual se hace cargo de tratarse con amor y despertar al buen sol, si cada cual toma conciencia del lenguaje de los árboles, de los pájaros y de todos los seres que los habitan acá, todos los seres elementales, la tierra, el agua, el fuego, el aire, si cada día honran su vida y si ven que ese ritual nos hermana a todos y no tiene que ver con el que vive en el campo o en la ciudad, sino con humanos territoriales. Buenas noches.
A mí me parece muy valioso la respuesta de la comunidad organizada ante situaciones extremas. Me refiero que quizás no la valoramos suficientemente. Me refiero precisamente
a estas catástrofes climáticas que tuvimos últimamente, con inundaciones, campanas, Zárate y algunas de las regiones más. El hecho solo que un tren, solamente un tren, llevara 400 toneladas de alimentos entre los aguas, como un solo dato, y todo lo demás, esa respuesta de la comunidad organizada, de la solidaridad activa, no sé si se ve en otras sociedades, pero sí se ve en otras. Y fue realmente conmovedor ver ese tren con los botellones de agua llevándola a la zona crítica de inmediato. Y sobre todo ese gesto tan hermoso del personal ferroviario custodiándolo, pero al mismo tiempo de las distintas estaciones por donde pasaba, los saludos, los aplausos, es decir, esto que era un saber colectivo. A mí me parece que eso habla de nuestro pueblo, eso habla de las características de nuestro pueblo, y que quizás no lo valoramos suficientemente, y realmente es un acto no diría heroico, pero mucho más.
I want to believe that love can conquer everything.
Si ustedes lo viven, no sé si usted, su sociedad norteamericana vive de esta manera la respuesta de la sociedad.
It does, but not always, and not always in the best way. When we had Hurricane Harvey, which caused billions of dollars of damage, a lot of the former Black Panthers in Houston were out in the streets looking after their neighbors in ways that were very generous. But we just had another big hurricane in the United States, Hurricane Helene, and the government did a very bad job of providing aid, and the groups that got there first were neo-Nazis. The neo-Nazis had horses, and they were able to go where the cars couldn't go, and they were there providing social services as a way of recruiting. I mean, they understand, like the Black Panthers do, that if someone needs their house reconstructed, then that's what you do. And I think that's an important reminder for us, that the far right is also aware of how hegemony works and how power works. So yes, in the United States, it is possible to see some of these beautiful moments of care and of love and of solidarity. But it is also not guaranteed. There's no politics that is guaranteed. Even the politics of love is not guaranteed. I mean, I love my parents, but they are all Hindu fascists. My parents have been radicalized by WhatsApp and by Indian TV news. And so now they believe that Muslims are out to kill them. Even though some of their best friends are Muslim.
Los musulmanes, y es el mismo lenguaje del antisemitismo, o sea, exactamente el mismo es el anti-islamismo, y que hay cada vez más, no iglesias, como se llaman los templos, hay más templos musulmanes, estamos invadidos por los musulmanes, y esto como una alerta en Europa con un lenguaje exactamente igual al del antisemitismo.
But that's why I think the politics matters. And what one of my favorite Argentinians said, that a revolution is an act of great love. And I think that we need that idea, right? That yes, we need to act with love. Pero necesitamos la revolución, yeah, exactly, right? So the love helps, but ultimately we need much more transformative left politics.
palabras acá a la maestra para que nos cuente qué es este acto sagrado que vamos a compartir.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Hoy va al mediodía, me ha cruzado así como un rayo con una pregunta: ¿cómo podríamos cambiar la alimentación industrial, la alimentación que viene del sistema? Obviamente son sistemas en pugnas y no son de fácil convivencia. Y hablamos de la educación como una de las cosas básicas. Hablamos de la cocina, el pan de cada día. Con Quita armamos un pequeño recetario sencillo. La cocina como un espacio de resistencia, un espacio de justicia y de equidad en las casas. Las familias que se juntan en la mesa se escuchan, se conocen, conversan. La comida que en general usamos acá en el museo, la comida que propongo, la comida que tuve en mis restaurantes vegetarianos, tenía cara. Siempre dije eso: esta comida tiene cara. Sé quién produce casi todos los alimentos que vienen a los platos. Creo que estos lazos con las comunidades del alimento es uno de los caminos, lazos poderosos con los agricultores, con los pescadores artesanales, con los pastores, también con las cocineras tradicionales, con sus costumbres, y la comensalidad, que es lo que siempre proponemos y de lo que Quita ha hablado y sostenemos en las cátedras. La comensalidad, la belleza, la felicidad y la solidaridad. La solidaridad básica que nos atraviesa, la solidaridad del barcito que saca estos menúes para la gente que necesita comer. En Argentina hay muchos niños que se van sin cenar, son cifras así institucionales. Y aparte, esa huerta que está en el seno de una universidad. Es un tesoro realmente, tener un huerto agroecológico con una escuela agroecológica en el seno de una universidad, que siempre las universidades todavía son partes del sistema, así que es muy importante. Hicimos un pequeño locro que traje de casa, tiene un poco de carne, te aviso. Es un maíz blanco y poroto, una comida típica de nuestro territorio, de olla, como te conté hoy, la dueña de la frase: comida de olla, cocina criolla, como nos enseñó Quita. Y después son vegetales, es unos panes que trajo una compañera divinos, unos panes con nueces y pasas, una especie de ceviche, todos vegetales, y bueno, cosas que trajeron también los compañeros, frutos secos, picantes, una crema de zanahorias, una tartita. Hay algunas otras cosas allá, me parece. Esto, una mesa que siempre compartimos acá en nuestra casa, el Museo del Hambre. Bienvenido.